Out there, in the American frontier, the difference between life and death often came down to the weapon in your hands. Frontiersmen, hunters, gunslingers, soldiers, bounty hunters, and warriors relied on these weapons as a lifeline. And some of these weapons were brutal, unforgiving, and designed to end fights before they even began. Some of these weapons became legends. Others were too brutal, too effective, or too impractical to see widespread use. But all of them left their mark on history. One shot, one cut, one battlefield at a time. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Strap in, because out here, the only rule is kill or be killed. We're kicking off our countdown with a weapon as old as warfare itself. Number 10, Tomahawk. The tomahawk was a frontier survival tool, a trade commodity, and, when necessary, an instrument of war. Lightweight, deadly, and brutally effective, it found its way into the hands of warriors, militiamen, and settlers alike. If you were fighting on the American frontier, the odds were good. You had one strapped to your belt. The Algonquian people get credit for the original design, long before Europeans set foot on the continent. Early versions had stone or antler heads, which were then napped and lashed to wooden shafts with rawhide. But once metalworking arrived with European traders, the tomahawk evolved. Iron and steel replaced stone, taking hints from Royal Navy boarding axes, short, vicious tools designed to hack through close combat. These new metal-headed tomahawks spread fast, adopted by tribes across the Great Plains and the South. What made the tomahawk stand out was its versatility. Need to chop wood? Done. Break open a crate? Easy. Crack an enemy's skull? No problem. Some versions had a hammer or spike on the back, making them even more practical, and even deadlier in a fight. Then there were the pipe tomahawks with a tobacco bowl on one end and a hollow shaft for smoking. It was the perfect symbol of frontier diplomacy. One side for peace, the other for war. The British saw the tomahawk's potential early on. By the late 1700s, they were standard issue for colonial troops, including the famous Rogers Rangers. These were hardened frontiersmen, experts at ambushes, survival, and moving fast through enemy territory. A quick, sharp swing could end a fight just as easily as a musket ball. Tomahawk warfare also saw action on both sides of the American Revolution, used by Patriot riflemen and British loyalists alike. The tomahawk represented the ruthless adaptability of frontier fighters, fast, brutal, and unforgiving. Whether used for battle, trade, or sealing an uneasy truce, the tomahawk was a weapon that belonged to the frontier in every way. But if you wanted raw stopping power, you needed something bigger. And this takes us to number 9, Hawken Rifle. Now this is what we like to call the frontier's big game slayer. The Hawken Rifle was a phenomenal survival tool, a status symbol, and a death sentence for anything unlucky enough to stand in front of it. Built for the rough, lawless frontier, this was the rifle carried by the mountain men, trappers and hunters who lived and died by their ability to hit hard and fast. Jacob and Samuel Hawken knew exactly what they were doing when they set up shop in St. Louis in 1815. They weren't making delicate, over-decorated guns for show. No, they built rifles that could drop a grizzly in its tracks and punch through the thick hide of a buffalo at long range. Designed for the brutal demands of the West, the Hawken rifle, often called the Rocky Mountain rifle, was deadly accurate and packed a serious punch. The first documented Hawken rifle showed up in 1823, built for fur trade mogul William Henry Ashley. He called it Old Bill, and for good reason. This beast had a 42-inch barrel and fired a .68 caliber ball, enough stopping power to make sure whatever it hit wasn't getting back up. By the 1830s, the rifle was in the hands of some of the frontier's deadliest men, trappers, scouts, and brigade leaders like Andrew Drips, Lucien Fontenelle, and Auguste Archambault. If you were in the business of survival, a Hawken rifle was a solid investment. Unlike the mass-produced rifles that came later, each Hawken was handcrafted, one at a time, by a small crew turning out about 100 rifles a year. That exclusivity made it a weapon of choice for some of the frontier's most legendary names: Hugh Glass, Kit Carson, Jim Bridger, and even Theodore Roosevelt. If your job involves staring down an angry grizzly or defending yourself in the middle of nowhere, this was the rifle you wanted. And hey, if you want to hear the wild tales behind some of these legendary frontiersmen, then don't forget to check out the videos on the channel. Meanwhile, as the frontier evolved, so did its firearms, evolving with new firepower for a new era. Number 8. Springfield Trapdoor Rifle. On the frontier, the Springfield Trapdoor Rifle earned its reputation the hard way. Dubbed the needle gun for its long firing pin, this weapon started as a battlefield hack, an 1865 conversion of leftover Civil War muzzleloaders into breech-loading rifles. The trapdoor name came from its distinctive hinged breech block, which flipped open to load a fresh round. The early models fired a hefty .58 caliber rimfire cartridge, but by 1866, the Army rolled out the improved .5070 centerfire version, giving soldiers the firepower they needed to hold their ground in the brutal Indian Wars. Now this was the rifle that saved the U.S. Army's hide along the Bozeman Trail. In the hayfield and wagon box fights of 1867, small detachments of troops fought off hundreds of Lakota warriors, reloading faster than their enemies could close the distance. Hide hunters also took notice. Buffalo Bill Cody used his own .5070 Allen conversion, a rifle he named Lucretia Borgia after the infamous Renaissance noblewoman. Beautiful but deadly. With it, he slaughtered hundreds of buffalo to supply meat for the railroads. By 1873, the Springfield Model 1873 became the Army's first standard-issue breech-loading rifle. It came in both a full-length infantry model and a shorter cavalry carbine. The rifle earned its place through rigorous trials led by Brigadier General Alfred H. Terry. Nearly 100 rifles, including repeaters like the Spencer and Winchester, were tested for reliability, rate of fire, and battlefield durability. In the end, the single-shot Springfield won out, not because it was the fastest, but because it was the most reliable and cheapest to produce. New recruits could fire about 8 rounds per minute. Seasoned soldiers could push it to 15. For all its flaws, the Springfield Trapdoor was a game-changer. It gave soldiers, frontiersmen, and buffalo hunters the range and firepower to survive in an unforgiving land. Slow by modern standards, sure, but when it counted, this rifle could mean the difference between life and death. And why stop at one shot when you could fire again and again? This brings us to Number 7. Winchester level-action repeating rifles. Now this is the big brother of the West. The Winchester 73 was truly the darling of the Old West. Compact, reliable, and chambered for revolver calibers like .4440, .3840, and .3230, it gave cowboys, outlaws, and lawmen the luxury of carrying a rifle and revolver that shared the same ammunition. No surprise that it became a favorite of Texas Rangers, U.S. Marshals, and just about anyone riding the frontier. It fit neatly in a saddle scabbard, took a beating, and kept running. And if the Winchester Model 1873 was the gun that won the West, its big brother, the Model 1876, was the gun that hit harder, reached farther, and meant business when things got serious. Heavier framed and chambered for real rifle cartridges, not the pistol-sized rounds of its predecessors, this was a rifle for men who needed stopping power, whether they were dropping buffalo, defending a frontier homestead, or riding with the Texas Rangers. Introduced at the Centennial Exposition in 1876, it was built to handle full-sized rifle rounds, not the lighter pistol cartridges the 73 used. If you were hunting grizzlies or stopping a charging bison, you needed something that could punch through thick hide and muscle. The 76 delivered. The Model 1876 came in 4 flavors. First, there was the carbine, a 22-inch barrel. This was short, handy, perfect for the saddle. Then there was the Express Rifle, a 26-inch barrel, half-length magazine. This had a balance of firepower and handling. Thirdly, there was the Sporting Rifle, a 28-inch barrel. Now this was built for serious hunters. And lastly, there was also the Musket, a 32-inch barrel. And this was the military's pick, though not widely issued. If you needed proof that the Model 1876 was built for business, just look at who carried one. There was Theodore Roosevelt, who had a custom engraved model with a pistol grip and half magazine, which he used on his early hunting expeditions. Geronimo, the legendary Apache leader, also had a 76 on him when he finally surrendered in 1886. There were a bunch of lawmen and outlaws alike as well. Names like Pat Garrett, Butch Cassidy, Belle Starr, and Billy the Kid all had reasons to trust Winchester steel when the stakes were high. So, in a nutshell, if you were walking into the wild, these were the guns you wanted in your hands. And now, meet the king of one-shot kills at number 6, Sharp's Rifle. Old reliable, death at a distance. If there was a single-shot rifle that defined the brutality of the American frontier, it was the Sharp's. This was no dainty gentleman's firearm. It was a hard-hitting, bone-crushing, buffalo-killing machine that could turn a target into red mist from a half-mile away. Designed by Christian Sharps in 1848, this beast of a rifle earned a deadly reputation for its accuracy, power, and reliability. By 1874, it had evolved to handle the new breed of powerful metallic cartridges, and its performance on the frontier quickly earned it the nickname Old Reliable. The name stuck not for marketing's sake, but because the Sharps delivered every time. After the Civil War, Sharp's rifles found a new purpose, slaughtering buffalo by the thousands. Hunters used them to drop bison with long-range precision, fueling the hide trade and hastening the near extinction of the American buffalo. The power of these rifles was no joke, firing massive .40 to .50 caliber cartridges. They could punch through thick hide, muscle, and bone like paper. The most serious sharpshooters even took their sport to 1,000-yard Creedmoor matches, proving that the rifle was deadly and devastatingly precise. By 1881, the Sharps Rifle Company shut its doors, but the legend never died. Modern replicas are still being made today for reenactors, long-range shooters, and history buffs who want to feel the raw power of one of the West's most brutal weapons. We know one thing for sure, however, the Sharps rifle killed from a distance, and it did it well. And although the Sharps was deadly, keep in mind that it wasn't alone. This takes us to number 5, Remington Rolling Block Rifle. Now this was the workhorse of the frontier. Tough, simple, and damn near indestructible, this rifle became the go-to for countless hunters, frontiersmen, and even military forces across the world. From the 1860s into the early 20th century, E. Remington and Sons whipped out these breech-loading rifles in every caliber imaginable, making sure that if you needed a reliable rifle, you had one. The design was as straightforward as it was genius. The rolling block mechanism was a single-action, single-shot system. Pull back the hammer, roll the breech block open, load a round, and let it rip. No frills, no complicated parts, just raw firepower and mechanical simplicity. This meant fewer things could go wrong in the field, which is exactly why buffalo hunters loved it. When you're putting down a 1,000-pound bison at 300 yards, the last thing you need is a jam. And it wasn't just buffalo hunters who swore by it. In 1874, when the American rifle team squared off against the Irish at the Creedmoor Rifle Range, half the team was armed with rolling block Creedmoor models, while the other half used Sharps rifles. The result? A decisive American victory that cemented the rolling block's reputation as a long-range killer. Compared to flashier frontier rifles, the rolling block doesn't always get the same attention. But make no mistake, this was one of the most widely used, hardest-hitting rifles of the 19th century. Simple, durable, and lethal. Of course, some fights didn't have time for a reload. Number 4, double-barreled shotgun. And if you think the double-barreled shotgun is just some fancy sporting gun, think again. This is the crowd tamer. And on the American frontier, this was the ultimate equalizer. Cheap, brutal, and easy to use, it put firepower in the hands of anyone willing to shoulder the recoil. Pioneers scraping together their last dollars for a shot at the West weren't about to waste money on an arsenal. They needed one gun that could do it all: hunt game, fend off bandits, and keep angry mobs in check. The double barrel fit the bill. Whether a muzzle loader or breech loader, cap lock, or metallic cartridge, it became the go-to firearm for settlers, lawmen, express riders, native warriors, miners, ranchers, and bounty hunters alike. Unlike single-shot muskets or slow-loading rifles, a double-barrel shotgun could fire 2 rounds in rapid succession, 1 per trigger, or even both barrels at once, if the shooter could handle the bone-rattling recoil. It was called the crowd tamer for a reason. Just pointing it at a group of rowdy troublemakers was often enough to make them rethink their life choices. And if they didn't, well, 2 barrels of buckshot tended to settle the argument. Accuracy wasn't its strong suit, but it didn't need to be. At close range, a blast from a scattergun was a death sentence. And with an effective ammo range of 4 to 6 times its practical spread, it was still dangerous even past its intended reach. And unlike pump or semi-auto shotguns, a double barrel was straightforward. Break it open, see if it's loaded, snap it shut, and you're good to go. No fumbling with a bolt, no worrying about jamming in the heat of battle. And when it came time to reload, crack it open, drop in 2 fresh shells, and you were back in business. That said, some veteran hunters used this trick with heavy-gauge elephant guns, sending 2 massive slugs into a charging beast, or a charging outlaw, at close range. And when you carried a double-barrel shotgun, you had an instant ticket to respect or fear, depending on which end of the barrels you were facing. It was, and still is, one of the most reliable and devastating weapons to ever ride the frontier. And if 2 barrels weren't enough, steel would settle the score. Number 3. Bowie knife. You see, on the frontier, a knife was a symbol of survival through its own might, and no blade earned a bloodier reputation than the Bowie knife. The knife takes its name from James Bowie, a man whose notoriety as a knife fighter outgrew the facts of his life. Some say he only fought one duel with a blade, the sandbar fight of 1827. But that was enough? The spectacle of Bowie gutting an armed opponent while wounded himself turned him into an overnight legend. Newspapers from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. spread the story, and soon men all over America wanted a knife like his. But what exactly is a Bowie knife? That's where things get messy. You see, by the mid-1800s, Bowie knife became a catch-all term for large, wickedly sharp blades designed for both combat and survival. Some had straight edges, some had clip points, some were long enough to double as short swords. The most infamous designs came from Arkansas bladesmith James Black, who supposedly crafted a knife that could slice like a razor, hack like a hatchet, and even be used as a makeshift paddle. These knives were essential frontier tools, skinning game, chopping wood, or intimidating anyone who looked at you sideways. A properly sharpened Bowie could peel the hide off a carcass just as easily as it could carve up an enemy. That versatility made it the blade of choice for pioneers, mountain men, and outlaws alike. But as revolvers became more affordable after the Civil War, the need for a massive fighting knife declined. By the late 1800s, the Bowie had shrunk down, becoming more of a sharp hunting and camping knife than a weapon of war. Still, its legend never died. Steele wrote the first chapters of The Frontier, but lead finished the story. And if you're fascinated by the Bowie knife and its legendary past, we've got a deep dive video covering all the details. Check out the link in the description. Moving on. Number 2, long rifle. Now forget the clunky muskets of European battlefields. On the American frontier, accuracy meant survival. Enter the long rifle, the weapon that put food on the table and sent redcoats running. Whether you call it the Kentucky rifle, the Pennsylvania rifle, or just the American long rifle, this was the gun that shaped a continent. Developed by German gunsmiths in southeastern Pennsylvania in the early 1700s, the long rifle was a game changer. It had a ridiculously long barrel, often over 4 feet, and a small caliber bore, a combination that gave it unmatched accuracy. Unlike the smoothbore muskets used by most armies of the time, this rifle had rifled grooves inside the barrel. That meant a lead ball wouldn't just blast out in some random direction, it would spin, staying deadly accurate over much longer distances. And that made all the difference. Frontiersmen weren't fighting in neat rows like European soldiers. They were hunting, ambushing, and picking off enemies from a distance. With a musket, you were lucky to hit a man at 50 yards. With a long rifle, a skilled shooter could nail a target at 200 yards or more. That's the difference between eating deer stew for dinner or going hungry. It's also the difference between a redcoat making it home to Britain or bleeding out on some wooded trail. Captain John G. W. Dillon summed it up best in his 1924 book, The Kentucky Rifle. An unknown smith in a shop long since silent fashioned a rifle which changed the whole course of world history, fatally precise, distinctly American. But compared to a musket, the long rifle took longer to reload. You had to jam a tight-fitting lead ball down the barrel every time you fired. And after a few shots, black powder fouled the bore, making it nearly impossible to reload without a thorough cleaning. That's fine when you're picking off deer in the woods, but in a chaotic battle, not ideal. Still, the rifle's accuracy and efficiency made it an absolute necessity for hunters, scouts, and sharpshooters. Soldiers used them in the French and Indian War, the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and even into the Civil War. By the 1750s, frontiersmen carrying these sleek, deadly rifles were a common sight. The long rifle evolved too, larger calibers for bigger game, thicker barrels for durability, even shorter versions like the Hawken rifle, which traded length for portability. But the heart of the long rifle, the idea of precision over firepower, never changed. Some might argue that this was the rifle that built America. And now, for our final weapon, proof that not every deadly rifle needed gunpowder. Number 1. Girardoni Air Rifle. Forget black powder and musket balls. In the late 1700s, an Italian gunsmith named Bartolomeo Girandoni designed something straight out of a science fiction novel, the Girandoni Air Rifle. No smoke, no gunpowder, just a deadly .46 caliber lead ball, fired silently with nothing but compressed air. For its time, this was a game changer. While muzzle loaders forced soldiers to stand up and reload under fire, the Girandoni let a shooter stay low and keep shooting. A simple flick of a chamber bar dropped a new ball into place, and the rifle was ready to fire again. No fumbling with powder, no ramrods, just pure mechanical efficiency. The air reservoir, hidden in its club-shaped stock, carried enough pressure to fire 30 rounds before losing power. At full strength, it could hit a target up to 125 yards away, deadly without the telltale bang of a musket shot. But the rifle had one big weakness. Air pressure was tough to maintain on the battlefield. Soldiers had to carry hand pumps or air tanks, a logistical nightmare compared to simply grabbing more gunpowder. In the end, its complexity kept it from widespread military use. But on the American frontier? Different story. Meriwether Lewis carried one during his legendary expedition across the Louisiana Territory. Every time he and Clark met a new Native American tribe, he'd fire off a rapid series of shots, showing off the rifle's seemingly impossible ability to fire without powder. The stunned onlookers called it great medicine. And so, in a land where firepower often meant survival, the Girandoni was as much a psychological weapon as a physical one. There's still some debate over whether Lewis's air rifle was a true Girandoni or a similar model built by Philadelphia gunsmith Isaiah Lukens. But one thing is clear. On a frontier where gunfights were settled with slow, single-shot weapons, this air rifle was a brutal anomaly. Silent, fast, deadly. And as we come to the end of today's episode, there's no denying it. The frontier was a brutal place, and all of these weapons made sure only the toughest survived. Some built legends, others wiped them out. But one thing's certain, when these weapons spoke, history listened.